I recently needed to recreate a logo as a vector object and had these older bitmap images to work from in producing the final vector image. This image looks to have more of a raw hand-painted effect, and I wanted to maintain that. And even though this one is quite pixelated, the red background definitely has that similar raw effect. So this is what I started with, and this is the vector image I ended up creating. And of the three approaches, this is the third and final approach, which uses the pen tool to create the paths and then applies brushes to those paths. This video is meant to serve as a reference guide for quickly implementing the techniques I explored in creating this logo. In the description below the video, I've indicated the starting times for each of the topics we'll be discussing, and what we'll be covering are the image trace feature, subtracting a brushed on overlay from a solid outline of the image, and applying brushstrokes to paths. So I started by exploring Illustrator's image trace feature, and this required me to darken the image in Photoshop, so I had to make it more of a black and white in order for the image trace feature to better get at the details. And then I brought it back into Illustrator and applied image trace. So I played around with all the settings, but wasn't really happy with the end results. It gets very jagged on the one extreme and very soft on the other. But in the end, it just seemed as though not enough of the detail actually came through. So I explored applying brushstrokes to the edges of an outlined logo. But even though I like this approach because of the vintage look that it can give text and images as you add some of that distressed and aged detail, I didn't really like what it was doing in this scenario. Depending on the brushstroke placement itself and the path that I'm laying down, the results are a little too random for what I was hoping to achieve. But the final step in executing this approach is to select the strokes and expand them. So we'll lock the other layer so as not to disturb it. Now all of our strokes have become vectors. And now we can select everything and subtract those vectors. And we're left with the final result. So for the third approach, I have a copy of the image I want to replicate, and I'll create a new layer for the outline of the hand. I'll select the pen tool and begin. And now I'll go back and fit the curves a little bit better to the lines. And that looks pretty good. Next we'll apply a brush, and in this case we'll be using charcoal feather. Give it a stroke of white. Next we'll create the bold heart. And this time we'll apply the brush charcoal thick. One thing to note here is that the brush stroke is fit to run the length of the path. So what I want to do is break it so that we have two different strokes, one beginning here and ending here, and another one beginning there and ending here. But this is the reason why it's running one long stroke from the beginning point to the end point based on the options here. So we'll take our direct select tool. We're going to use this cut feature. Select this point, shift and select this point. Now we have those two highlighted. We cut it, and as you can see, we have another set of beginning and end points along with the original beginning and end points. Next, we'll add our rectangular background. So we'll create a new layer. Retrieve our rectangle tool. And then we'll apply the fill that I've already added to my library. Make sure the stroke is turned off. Place it behind the hand and heart. Next, we'll add the rough looking borders. But before we do that, let's go back and make the corners a little bit rounded. So continuing, we take the pen tool, and I'm going to sketch out a corner with a line and then another corner. We'll remove the fill and add the stroke. And the color of the stroke doesn't matter because we're going to make it red eventually after we expand it. So again, we'll apply a brush stroke, and this time let's use charcoal varied. Stretch these points out a little bit. And now we have a little bit of overlap around the top. So we'll take this shape and copy and paste it. Going to rotate it 180 degrees and apply it to the bottom. Next, we'll create lines for the sides. Apply the stroke. Nudge it over a bit. We'll do the same, copy and paste, and rotate it as well. Drag it into place. And then we'll select all of those paths and expand them into vector objects. Everything else is locked, so let's select them all. Object, expand appearance. Now they're groups instead of paths. So we'll go get our fill color again. And we have our outside pattern. To finish, we'll do the same for the hand and heart in order to create a vector out of those paths. With those selected, expand appearance, and we have our finished product in vector form. If you've made it this far, I hope that the video proved helpful. For me, it's good to try to articulate the things that I'm learning, so at a minimum I know it will continue to prove helpful for me as a reference. Thanks for watching.